Hey guys, how's everybody doing? I'm back for another video. So today's video, coilover suspension versus lowering springs, which is the best choice for a daily driver. So before I get into that, let's just talk about what the difference is between a lowering springs and a coilover. So most obvious thing is the springs themselves. Lowering springs, and when I talk about lowering springs specifically, I'm talking about your likes of H&R, IBAC, etc. They will be progressive springs. Coilover springs are linear. And the second thing, this really depends on the coilover, but all coilovers are height adjustable. Obviously lowering springs are not. And then some coilovers also have adjustable dampers, which means they're adjustable for hardness and softness. Obviously, the lowering springs will use the car's original dampers. So though that's the key differences there. So when I say, lowering springs versus coilovers, which is better for a day-to-day driver, I'm assuming not prepared to sacrifice performance in the pursuit of looks. So the truth of the matter is, 99% of the time, for 99% of the cars, lowering springs will give better performance than coilovers. That is just the way it is. Well, one of the biggest factors in lowering springs being better is that the ride height has been optimized for the car that the springs are going on to, which cannot be said for coilovers. Coilovers, like I said at the start, they give you height adjustability, but that means you've got to find the optimal ride height yourself. And, depending on how much hassle work you want to put into it, you may or may not find the optimum for your car. Whereas when you buy lowering springs, at least from a quality manufacturer like H&R and IBAC, there's been an engineer or engineers that have been testing those springs to find out the optimal ride height for that car, so you don't need to do any research and development yourself. You can just bolt them on the car, and you know that setup, that ride height, is optimal for your car. Traction is probably going to be better with lowering springs because there's more more compliance across the axle. So if you're going down the road and there's a bump in the road, so say when the right wheel goes across a bump, it's going to reduce the weight on the left bump also, because lowering springs like sports springs, H&R and IBAC will also do that, but nowhere near to the same extent as coilovers and their springs, which have no progressivity. So in cornering, braking and acceleration, you're probably going to have less traction with coilovers versus lowering springs. Goes without saying, you're going to have a smoother ride with lowering springs over coilovers. Again, it comes down to the progressivity of the springs. With regards to stability, again, it depends on the road how bumpy it is, but 99% of the time, I would say for 99% of the cars, stability is going to be just as good. You can have all the stability that you need with lowering springs. You're not going to need the coilovers. So if lowering springs are so fantastic, why is there such a thing as coilover suspension if progressive springs are so great? There is one thing that coilovers do better than lowering springs, and that is stability when you don't need to deal with bumps and dips and an uneven road surface, i.e. on a racetrack. You don't need the comfort, you don't need the compliance so much on a racetrack. So on track, lowering springs are going to be inferior to coilover suspension. And on the road, there is one situation where the coilover is superior, and that is in quick direction changes. So if you turn left, right, in quick succession, the higher the speed that you do that, the more stable a coilover is going to be, because it has more iron fist control over the car's body. How often you encounter that circumstance, only you know. Another bonus, lowering springs are going to be much cheaper than fitting coilovers. So top quality set of lowering springs, say they're going to be around €200, £200 for your car. Top quality, best in the world quality. Super quality coilovers for your car. Well, a very good quality coilovers for your car are going to be minimum €800, £900, £900. So in reality, there's no real point in fitting coilovers to a road car. Believe me, I was one of the biggest, what could you say, biggest advocates of fitting coilovers to a car. I mean, coilover was the only suspension I would fit. But having used it, maybe I'm getting older. Maybe it's that. Maybe it's age. But I've got to tell you that, you know, coilovers for me, it's a completely pointless exercise on the road. Okay, the only benefit with it is that you can get the car lower with coilovers. You can get it lower than you can with lowering springs. But like I said at the start of the video, if you're going to lower it lower than the lowering springs do IH and I back, you're going to be compromising the performance of the car. So having said all that, there are a couple of exceptions to the rule. So that would be cars that have an extremely rigid suspension from the factory, i.e. an uncomfortable suspension from the factory. So a couple of the ones that stand out, not that I have personal experience of them, but from what I have heard, namely from Matt Farah has a Focus RS, and Chris Harris had a GT3 997, and they said that the suspensions on the car were, you know, very rigid, very stiff from the factory. So both of those guys, they did the same thing. They fitted coilovers to the car, and both of them said it was a remarkable improvement in ride quality over the stock suspension. I think I'm quite a quick driver. You know, I do like to put my foot down. I do like to take corners, and you know, there's a few specific corners that I encounter, you know, when I'm driving. And okay, I need a coilover to get the most from those corners. But those corners occupy literally, you know, maybe 20 seconds from, you know, 40 hours of driving in reality. So, you know, how important is it? You know, it's probably not that important, and there are other roads around that I drive on more often, or I could drive on more often, which are quite bumpy and which I can't really take on with coilover suspension. So, you know, in reality, okay, the ultimate road, you know, very good corners, very good road surface, it's fast, it's clean, whatever. But for the majority of the time, I'm making compromises everywhere else just for those few corners, and you know, I don't think it's really worth it, honestly. I'd just like to be able to drive everywhere at the speed I want. You know, I don't want to make any compromises anywhere. And if the compromise is I get to the limit of the car sooner for, you know, a few corners for a road car, you know, so be it. So like I said, I was one of the biggest advocates of coilover suspension on a road car, but I've got to be honest, I completely changed my mind. You know, one of the biggest things for it was the ride height for me. I wanted to get it low, but you know, having experienced like cars lowering springs, which excessively lower the car, and the testing to get the right ride height for a car on coilovers, I've got to be honest, you know, just it wasn't worth the hassle. Okay, for a racetrack track day, definitely coilovers, no question. But for a daily driver, I honestly lose out more with the coilovers than I get from it. And that's the reality of the situation, guys. You're going to go, in my experience, you're going to go faster for more of the time with a compliant suspension, just because it is the road, it is public roads, you know. So that's it, guys. That is my answer, at least, to the question: coilovers versus lowering springs, which is better for the daily driver? And honestly, I don't think it's even close. Maybe you're going to lose a bit in the looks department, but you're just going to be getting it back everywhere in the performance department, you know. And that's it. That's all I got to say on it, guys. So as always, thank you for watching. You know, subscribe to the channel, vote on the video, and I'll see you again next time.